Please listen up. This is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, speaking about the death of Elijah Cummings, as well as some other personal affairs that occurred yesterday pertaining to our chief and commander, Mr. Donald Trump. I would like to say for the record that the Bible talks about how that men's hearts will fail. Over in the book of Luke, Luke chapter 21, you'll read that chapter. It talks about how that people will give up life because of anxiety and stress. And I realized that Elijah had already had some health difficulties, but going through what he was going through pertaining to the president did not help matters none. In honor of Mr. Elijah, they are talking about naming the H.R. 3 drug cost, lowering cost of the drugs in honor of his work towards what he done for the people. Please listen to the Speaker of the House. It's worthwhile listening to. I made a call this morning that was sad to Homeland Security pertaining to our feelings of how we feel about certain things pertaining to the president. And we have been very, very hesitant towards using the word impeachment or being fired or resigning because of his actions. But yesterday was pretty obvious towards what he emerged to the platform of the world, the global world, that his interest is no longer for the safety and security of the American people towards doing what he's doing over in foreign affairs. It's really sad. We have reached a pinnacle moment, suppresses moment in history, that this is a very, very sad time for the Americans as well as the world to pay very, very close attention to these worldwide global affairs, as well as the loss of Elijah Cummings. Please listen.
Cost now legislation, whatever the formal title will be. It's very sad for all of us. We've all lost a friend. I'm devastated by the loss. I've conveyed our condolences of our caucus to Maya, his dear wife, this morning, and she said what we all knew. He just fought to the end. But that's the way he was, not only in his personal health, but what he believed in the Congress of the United States. So we're back now after our district work period. We're members all over the country. We're part of a drumbeat for H.R. 3 for our For the People agenda. Our first, number one, was to lower the cost of prescription drugs. They presented H.R. 3, heard feedback, and we are benefiting it with two markups this week, one in energy and commerce, the other in education and labor. The hearing in Ways and Means this week, and then the markup next week. And then we'll be well on our way to reconciling different versions and bringing something to the floor. I think it's really important to note that since the break, toward the end of the break, we did get this Congressional Budget Office, the CBO score of $345 billion in savings just in the Medicare Part D part of the bill. Other savings, $158 billion in savings for family households, $46 billion in rebates and the rest. So the savings are considerable, and the Congress will decide how they will be. Some of it will be reinvested into innovation at the National Institutes of Health, perhaps in community health centers across the country, and expanded benefits for Medicare, visual, hearing, dental. Perhaps that's up to the committees. We'll hear back from them, and just trying to lower the cost to the community. Bobby Scott's committee is marking up this bill, but as many of you know, earlier in the week we announced his College Affordability Act, and we're very proud of the response from the members on that, and that will be making college less expensive. We're still at work on the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement and making progress every day on our path to yes, but we're not there yet. As soon as we can get the assurances from the administration and from everyone involved that there will be enforceability of some of the provisions of the legislation, that it will really be an improvement on the current NAFTA, then we'll be able to proceed. But I'm optimistic about that. I'm still hoping that, and this came up although we were focused on for the people agenda, lower health care costs, build and bigger paychecks by building the infrastructure of America, cleaner government. That was our agenda in the campaign. One of our priorities in this session has been to reduce the risk of gun violence in our country. It's now been 232 days since we sent our bipartisan legislation to the Senate. Every day, about 100 people die from gun violence, nearly half of them children up to the age of teenagers. My colleague, Frederica Wilson, when I was in Florida during the break, gave me this bracelet made from a bullet and the orange color of gun violence prevention. So we're not going away until we get legislation passed to reduce gun violence in our country. As you know, this has been a week of some issues that relate to our foreign engagement. I was very proud of the work on the floor of Congress to associate ourselves with the democratic aspirations of the young people of Hong Kong. I've been working with now 3 generations of Hong Kong democratic leaders just for the Chinese regime to obey the basic law under which Hong Kong was to exist, one country, 2 systems, living under the basic law, which made certain guarantees that are not being lived up to. But Congress came through this week, spoke very clearly in a bipartisan way about our support for that. Now we are eager that we have bipartisan support in the Senate too, so hopefully that will come up soon there. As you know, yesterday on the floor, 354 members voted in a bipartisan way to oppose the president's dangerous decision in regard to Syria. By 2-1, Republicans voted to oppose the president's actions.
Good.
There were only 60 votes in favor of the legislation. The legislation would have called for Turkey to use restraint, for us to help our friends to be a trustworthy ally to Kurds, especially in humanitarian needs now that they're being bombed by the Turks or being attacked by the Turks. It also calls for the president to show a clear plan for how Americans will be protected from ISIS, which has been further unleashed. Green light to the Turks, actions taken that are renege on our handshake with the Kurds, and now we need to have a plan to deal with what happens with ISIS. As you know, that was the subject of conversation yesterday at the White House. I also pointed out to the president I had concerns that the L road seemed to lead to Putin. The Russians have been trying to get a foothold in the Middle East for a very long time unsuccessfully, and now the president has given them the opportunity with the Kurds reaching out to them for support in Syria. They have the Russians were the beneficiaries of any withholding of assistance or encouragement to the Ukraine. Again, Putin benefits. The Russians benefited, Putin did. The president placed some doubt about our commitment to NATO right from the start of his administration. All roads lead to Putin. Then the president said, well, the reason I'm taking the troops out of Syria is because I promised in the campaign to bring the troops home. My question to him was, is Saudi Arabia home?
Right.
Is Saudi Arabia home? Why are our troops going to Saudi Arabia if you promised to bring them home?
Right.
He said, well, the Saudi Arabians are paying for it. Really? We're putting our troops in harm's way for Saudi Arabia because they're paying? It just didn't add up. But what it did do was cause a meltdown on the part of the president because he was unhappy with those questions. And it was so unfortunate because we were invited to the meeting. The president started off the meeting by saying, I don't know who asked for this meeting, I didn't. And we're like, well, let's proceed anyway. And we had hoped that our real mission was to find out what the plan was. Leader Schumer was very forceful in that discussion with the president on what is the plan. My plan is to protect America, so that's a goal, but it's not a plan.
Right.
What is the plan for us to be protected from ISIS now
Right.
that some of them have been unleashed in Syria because of the green light that the president gave the Turks,
Right.
and reneging on our trustworthiness as an ally with the Kurds who have been our friends. So for these and other reasons, that was most unfortunate. On a separate front of all of that, I'm very proud of the work of Chairman Adam Schiff. Again, this is so solemn. None of us came to Congress to impeach a president. That's not what we come here to do. And any such actions are to be taken very solemnly and seriously, in my view, prayerfully. It isn't a unifying thing for the country to have to go through this, but we do have to honor our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, our democracy, and our republic, as Benjamin Franklin said.
Right.
Our republic, if we can keep it. Well, it is our fight to keep it. As I've said to you before, the times have found us to do just that.
Right.
So I'm very proud of the work that Adam Schiff is doing, and this isn't about politics or partisanship. It's about patriotism for our country, and I value the way he's conducting this with equal time on all sides for the questioning that are there. You've heard from him. We were here together when he presented how he was proceeding. He also sent a letter to members yesterday, which is in the public domain. I call it to your attention in case you have some questions about the professionalism and the fairness with which these hearings are being held. Any questions?
Thank you. First of all, my condolences on.
Yeah, that's so sad.
He was a remarkable man. On the impeachment inquiry, how important is it to you not to let this lead over into an election year?
Well, I think as I've really made, thanks Nancy for the question, and thank you for your condolences on that, Elijah. I keep saying to people, impeachment is about the truth and the Constitution of the United States. Any other issues that you have, disapproving of the way the president has dealt with Syria, whatever the subject is, reluctance, the cowardice to do something about gun violence, the cruelty of not wanting to help our dreamers and transgender people, the denial about a climate crisis that we face, the list goes on. That's about the election. That has nothing to do with what is happening in terms of our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution and the facts that might support. And we don't know where this path will take us, but could take us down a further path. But these two are completely separate.
But at what point do you say, let's let the voters decide?
Who said that?
No, I'm saying, at what point might you say, let's just let
No, the voters are not going to decide whether we honor our oath of office. They already decided that in the last election. Yes, ma'am.
Republican leader Mitch McConnell seems to think that an impeachment trial in the Senate could wrap up before the end of the year.
I have no idea. I have no idea. The path, the timeline will depend on the truth line, and that's what we're looking for. Chad?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On the Syria policy, and this is sort of a two-part question. Number one, do you think that we've gotten into this question about what should be the right policy in Syria? Because there has not been an AUMF since 2001 and 2002. And the second part, and this dovetails a little bit with what Nancy was asking, would there be a scenario where, as you said yesterday, it was dangerous what the president had done in regard to Syria, that this could bleed over into the impeachment issue because it's such a grave problem?
No. Let me answer your second question first. When I became speaker the first time, no, maybe not, but there were those who were here who, who knew that hundreds of thousands of people were on the street asking me to impeach President Bush because of the war in Iraq and because of the misrepresentation that was made at the time as to why we should be going into Iraq. That's a policy matter that isn't, in my view, an impeachment matter. And I said if they had any case to make, they could make it, but I was not going down that path. Again, what could be worse than the war in Iraq and the misrepresentations that were made to the American people? And as you know, says I was the senior Democrat on intelligence. I had the Adam Schiff job, the one he had before becoming chairman in the majority. But in the minority, I was a member of the Gang of Four. I saw all the intelligence. I knew that there was no intelligence to support the threat that the administration was putting forth. And I said at the time, the intelligence does not support the threat. Senator Graham of Florida was actually the chairman, because they had the majority at the time, the Democrats, the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and he came to the same conclusion. We both voted no on the war. So I think that the war in Iraq was one of the worst mistakes in our country. I did not think it was about impeachment. It's about policy, and that's a different debate. Impeachment is about the law, not being above the law, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, about honoring our oath. Honoring our oath of office.
Thank you very much. On the USMCA, you just said a short time ago, you're making progress every day. Leader McConnell, however, has charged in recent days, as has the president, that Speaker Pelosi is still blocking the USMCA because Democrats' impeachment is blocking urgent work for American families. So much of the work negotiation here, Speaker Pelosi, kind of happening behind the scenes. Are there ways for Democrats to better convey the good faith progress to prevent the president and Republican leaders from charging that you are trying to block this?
If anybody else want to put all the Republican talking points on the table, because we could just get rid of them all at once. Let me just respond to the second. Let me respond to your question rather than their misrepresentations. Okay. First and foremost, it might be interesting to you, but a negotiation of this nature, and the administration would support this. Not only support it, it's what they want. These negotiations are not in the public domain. The exchange of proposals and this or that is, I can't even share them with the members. In fact, I have a hard time getting some of it myself from time to time, and I do it as Pelosi written across it, so should it go astray, or I try to copy it to show anybody, that wouldn't happen. So these are confidential backs and forth, and I can honestly say that I think every day we are becoming closer. They were meeting yesterday with the trade representative, with some of our task force. I think they're going to meet again later today, perhaps at one more time, and then we should just see. The issue is, do we have enforcement? So the people who are saying that don't know what they're talking about or have a different agenda that they want to present. But we feel very good about being on a path to yes. We're not there yet because we don't have the enforceability assurance that we need to have. While we have some good things in the bill, it's only a list of good things unless it can be enforced.
Sure, as far as the other things like labor, environmental standards continue to be the Democrats.
But the three things, so the overarching is enforceability of the whole thing. And then the three concerns, as we have discussed before, are the environmental concerns. And as a Californian, I can tell you firsthand that needs to be addressed, but all the border states could probably tell you that as well, vis-a-vis the southern border. But the agreement has to be respectful of global agreements that are there on the environment. And this is about what is realistic that we can get done. In terms of the prescription drug, that's a very big issue in our caucus, and we hope that we can resolve that. And then the third are the workers' rights and the rest. We don't see a situation where diminishing the prospects for workers in Mexico is any good for our hemisphere. So we want that to be very fair in that regard. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and again, condolences on Trump. There was a picture yesterday that was taken at the White House with you standing at the table speaking to the president. Can you tell us a little bit about that picture and what was being said at that time?
I think I was excusing myself from the room, but I think I told you what the thoughts that I conveyed to the president in the meeting. about the 354 to 60 vote in the House disapproving of his Syria actions, A. B, my concerns about all roads leading to Putin. And if the president is saying, I said during the campaign I was going to take the troops home, then is home Saudi Arabia. That would be about the essence of either sitting down or standing up, what my conversation was with the president. But most important part of the meeting was, what is the plan? And that was part of my report on the legislation on the floor. What is the plan for fighting ISIS now that we have reneged on our handshake with the Kurds to do that fighting for us there? And that was strongly presented by Senator Schumer. So one or the other of those things are what was being said. I think it would be interesting, you tell me, if we could have a recording of what goes on in those offices, because they come out and say, oh, this happened and that happened. And you're like, we must have been at two different meetings because that didn't happen. But nonetheless, then you get these kind of questions and the rest that have no fidelity to fact, but it is true that that's what they said. It is true that that's what they said. So I don't know what at that moment I was probably saying all roads lead to Putin. Yes, ma'am. Last question.
As you pointed out, Chairman Schiff sent out the letter yesterday.
Yes.
Describing the process that he's going through in his committee right now, saying there could be public testimony ahead.
That's right.
I'm curious, how will you determine and when in the future rules for this process, including whether the president will be allowed to have counsel or representation down the road as part of impeachment?
Well, you know what? This is a matter for the committee, and the rules are. We have rules of the House that govern all of this. But I think it's really important to reiterate the following. The process that the House is going through right now would be the equivalent of a special counsel in case of whatever the name was at the time for the Clinton or Jaworski and Sareka, way back when, before you all were born, on the Nixon. So they had prosecutors who were doing the investigation, and they were not doing that in the public domain. And so this is the part where we gather evidence. And as I've said to the president over and over, if you have some, I said this to him on the phone the other day that we made our announcement about proceeding with the inquiry, that we've asked for your taxes. If you have nothing to hide, show us your taxes. We've asked for Mazer, your accounting. If you have nothing to hide, show us that. We've asked for this, that, and the other thing. If you have nothing to hide, we're giving you opportunity to show that you have nothing to hide. But what you're doing is just going further up into the courts. Now, last Friday, we had 5 court decisions in our favor. Another one this week. So in terms of the law, this is about the Congress, the courts, and the Constitution. And in terms of the Congress, our responsibility is to fairly get the information according to the rules. And Mr. Schiff is running that show for us now. Thank you all very much. That's it.
Well, once again, this is not your typical weekly press conference by Nancy Pelosi. It comes at a time when her very good friend and ally, Elijah Cummings, passed away. It comes as on the heels of what was an incredibly contentious meeting yesterday at the White House with President Trump, where he variously either called her third rate or third grade, but it ended very badly with him saying he'd see them at the polls, and the Democrats left that meeting. And most significantly, as Nancy Pelosi points out, it's come at a time when the president is facing off with both parties. Both parties rebuking him for his decision to abandon longtime American allies, the Kurds. We have NBC's Jeff Bennett on Capitol Hill. NBC's White House correspondent Peter Alexander is live on the North Lawn. Jeff, let me start on Capitol Hill. A lot of the questions obviously were about impeachment. A couple of things are going on right now. You've got a key figure in the inquiry who is behind closed doors right now, the EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland. His testimony expected to be damning for the president as well as his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and questions being raised this morning by Chuck Schumer about whether or not a similar vote will be taken in the Senate as to what we saw in the House. Bring us up to date on all that activity on the Hill, will you?
Yeah, and I'll start with impeachment because you saw that the House Speaker there get a question from our colleague in the press corps, Nancy Cordes, about the timeline. The question was, do you, House Speaker, have in mind a timeline for wrapping up this impeachment inquiry by the end of the year? And the House Speaker has said what she said before. She says no, that neither the calendar nor outside influences will be the arbiter of this investigation. A quick reality check here, because there are Democrats, both here on the Hill and across the country now campaigning, who have said time and time again that they do want to avoid what would be the split screen of having Democrats here in Capitol Hill trying to remove Donald Trump from office via impeachment, while you have people trying to campaign, trying to remove him via the ballot box. On the other issue about Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the EU, who was here now going into his second hour testifying behind closed doors, his testimony today, Chris, is crucial, mainly because he is a central figure in this entire Ukrainian controversy, the entire Ukraine gambit. And his testimony, which we know about largely based on the reporting of our colleague Josh Letterman, is that he will say that this entire thing was directed by President Trump himself. And this notion that Rudy Giuliani, the president's outside attorney, was over there in Ukraine just freelancing it, doing whatever he wanted to, Sondland is making the case that no, that's not it at all, that Giuliani was actually working at the behest of President Trump and trying to elevate President Trump's stated goal. So this is part of the testimony. He's going to say that he was disappointed by President Trump's direction to work with Giuliani, but it was obvious, he's going to say, that engaging with Giuliani was the only way to change Trump's mind. Now, earlier today, as Gordon Sondland was making his way to the Hill here, had a chance to ask him a few questions. We were the only TV crew to get him a talk. Take a look at this. Did President Trump instruct you to say that there was no quid pro quo? Excuse me, sir. As a respected attorney, I'm sure you understand how the free press works, sir. Why was it important for you to show up here today?
It's always important to show up when Congress calls.
Are you here to salvage your reputation, sir?
I don't have a reputation to salvage.
And so the takeaway from reading the opening statement now that we have, you can see how the testimony that he provides really underscores and backs up what was laid out in the whistleblower complaint too, Chris.
All right, Peter, let me go to you. President Trump, who we thought we might hear from this morning, there were weather issues. There was no opportunity on the South Lawn. We did not hear from him at JBA. Right. But over just the past 24 hours, he's repeatedly called longtime allies the Kurds, no angels. He insulted the Speaker of the House. We saw a large swath, as Nancy Pelosi pointed out, 2-1 of his fellow Republicans in the House join Democrats in a vote to condemn his decision to withdraw troops from Syria. A series of events that show him increasingly isolated, and Nancy Pelosi suggested that he was very shaken up in that meeting yesterday. Tell us what your sources are saying there at the White House.
Well, obviously this is the sort of, put it back on you presidency, right? Where the president was accused of a meltdown there by Nancy Pelosi, and immediately he posted those pictures and said, no, I didn't have a meltdown, you had the meltdown here. The White House giving us a statement late yesterday saying that the president was measured, factual, and decisive here. But as we just heard from Nancy Pelosi, she's detailing more of the conversation that took place behind closed doors there, among other things. Pelosi saying that when she challenged the president's argument that he was bringing American troops home, she said, is Saudi Arabia home, of course, because the president, this White House has announced that it would be sending a couple thousand troops there regarding the crisis that exists already in that region here. The backdrop to it, as there was this contentious exchange between those Democratic lawmakers and the president and members of his administration, is that we are also hearing from the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, who today said about that House resolution condemning the president for his abrupt decision to withdraw troops from northern Syria, from that region, that he would prefer a, quote, stronger resolution on Syria. So Mitch McConnell, in effect, rebuking the president today as well. It's worth noting we have also heard from a White House spokesperson today speaking on Fox News, declining to take any other reporters' questions as he exited that interview, but during his interview on Fox, saying that it remains on the calendar that there would be a meeting by President Erdogan with President Trump here at the White House next month.
Peter Alexander, Jeff Bennett.
I didn't know. I think we didn't know the extent of the meeting that happened yesterday until today, to towards what was being said and in what frame of reference that it was being said in. The fact of the matter is, Nancy Pelosi hit the nail on the head whenever she questioned Donald Trump about a plan. Not a goal, but a plan. We know what the goal is. The goal is to protect, bring stability and security to not only the American people, but the world. The goal is to see some sort of peace or utopia that the Bible talks about to befallen upon to all nations and not just one. That's what the goal is. Now, what's the plan? Is what Nancy Pelosi was asking the president. What is the plan? And basically the president couldn't definitively come up with one. So I think at that point in time, not only Nancy knew that she was dealing with somebody that was basically just a rambler or somebody that had gone off the hinges, but at that point in time she realized that she was dealing with a very, very emotional, imbalanced human being that really and truly, if the truth be known, never should have been given that entitlement to begin with towards ever becoming the President of the United States. And at the time, whenever the people was doing the voting, choosing between the lesser of the two evils, maybe that was, at the time, the best choice. Or they felt like it was. They thought it was. And now, since things is unraveling the way that it is, especially by bringing all them troops to Saudi Arabia, knowing how people feels about 9/11 and knowing how people feels about the death of a journalist over there, and Donald Trump is still pushing his weight around towards rebelling against the will of the majority of the people. Especially in opening up a green door for President Putin to walk into that has escalated and backfired in the eyes of the American politicians. This is just about as serious and as sad that we've ever seen or went forth in American history, give or take around 240 years. The only thing that I know is, like Nancy Pelosi said, remain vigilant, remain in prayer, and try to pull ourselves out of this embarrassing situation that various political politicians has put us off into. And I don't necessarily put all the blame on Donald Trump, but the fact of the matter is he has exacerbated the problem. Instead of him having the solution to the problem, he's actually become part of the problem. He's exacerbated it, which just brings that much more anxiety, that much more tension, just like the book of Luke talks about in the King James Version Bible, where Jesus was teaching in Luke 21, 25, 26 verses throughout the book of Luke there in the 21st chapter, that these would be the incoming signs that men's hearts would be failing. And he wasn't just talking about that happening metaphorically. You know, metaphorically, you're talking about people walking away from their faith and joining up with the devil's rank. No, he was actually talking about heart attacks. He was talking about loss of life right there in the book of Luke, the 21st chapter. That men's hearts would literally be failing for fear of looking onto the things that was going to be falling upon to society here upon to the planet. That, my friend, is serious. You're not going to get no serious than to think that people are going to be losing their lives because of anxiety and stress that is associated with uncertainty and fear.
So much to get to. Thank you, gentlemen. And I want to bring in Matthew Miller, former chief spokesman for the Justice Department and an NBC News justice and security analyst, former Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Florida, and former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards of Maryland. A lot of things to get to, but let me start with, so you have all of this unfolding, and then National Security Advisor John Bolton, by the way, objecting to Sondland, who's testifying right now, elbowing his way into Ukraine diplomacy. The senior director for European and Russian affairs, Fiona Hill, considered him inexperienced and a liability. And yet, along with Rick Perry and Kurt Volker, he's one of the three amigos, Matt, who was running this operation. By all reports, he loved being in the middle of it. What does it tell you that at this very hour, he is there behind closed doors testifying?
I think he's very much trying to save his reputation, despite what he said to Jeff Bennett about not having a reputation to protect in the first place. I look at his.
And by the way, Jeff Bennett, we should point out again, getting pushed away from asking him a legitimate question.
That was Sondland's attorney, Robert Luskin, very inappropriate. He's an experienced Washington attorney who certainly knows better than that, and good for Jeff for standing up for his right to do his job and ask questions.
Yep.
When I look at Ambassador Sondland's testimony, I see someone who for years was chasing the bright lights of an ambassadorship. He finally got this job he wanted. He tried to ingratiate himself to the president, got in over his head, wound up doing something inappropriate, and now is trying to save himself and is telling a story that in some ways doesn't really add up. I mean, he tells that, look, of course it's not appropriate for the president's outside counsel, his outside attorney, to be directing foreign policy. That should be done by the State Department. He says that it's not appropriate for the president to direct a foreign government to investigate one of his political opponents. And he says that throughout this time he was working to get Ukraine to advance an investigation into corruption, into Burisma. He had no idea that meant Joe Biden. He had no idea that meant Hunter Biden, and that when the president first brought this up to him in May 23rd, he just thought it was part of a legitimate effort by the president to advance our interests to have Ukraine investigate corruption. This, of course, was just several weeks after the New York Times had reported in multiple stories that what Rudy Giuliani was after on behalf of the president was to get an investigation into Joe Biden. So I think in some ways Sondland's story doesn't add up, but I think it's important that he's here testifying, and he's doing so because he wants to protect his reputation, and he's not going to go down for Donald Trump.
And Congresswoman Edwards, Trump gave Sondland the go-ahead, and now you have this widely denounced decision to abandon America's Kurdish allies. The frustration erupting in that meeting that Nancy Pelosi was just asked about at the White House. The president, apparently, in his own defense, tweeted this photo afterwards. Nancy Pelosi was asked about it. She said she thinks, as she recalls, she was just saying to him, basically, we're going. He says she was having a nervous meltdown. What do you see in this photo?
Well, first of all, I know Nancy Pelosi, and she doesn't have nervous meltdowns. What I see is a Speaker of the House standing up and really trying to read the riot act to the President of the United States. And, when I hear what's
coming... And it's important to point out, this isn't about politics. This is about our national security. This is an issue about our standing in the world. This is an issue about whether our allies can count on us to keep our word.
Well, that's right. And remember that Nancy Pelosi in her remarks reminded us again that, she was part of the Intelligence Committee. She understands this. She has seen the intelligence. She knows what's at stake. And she was saying, as Republicans and Democrats, we actually have to come together, and they did on that bipartisan resolution condemning the president's acts. But She's saying we have to be in charge here because we face the resurgence of ISIS. We've reneged on our obligations and responsibilities to our allies. It sends a horrible message to the rest of the world. And by God, what are we doing sending troops to Saudi Arabia?
Right.
And Carlos Curbelo, Chuck Schumer at one point apparently intervened and asked the obvious question, is it your plan to rely on the Syrians and the Turks? Trump replied, our plan is to keep the American people safe. And then, as Nancy Pelosi just reiterated, it was reported that she said, that's not a plan, that's a goal. How disturbed should we all be if there is no plan? And if you don't have a plan, how do you send your Secretary of State and your Vice President over to talk to Erdogan to try to get something done here to roll back this disastrous situation?
Chris, what's significant is that this isn't only Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's view. This is the view of bipartisan leadership in the Congress. That resolution yesterday in the House, it was a significant development. People need to understand that most Republicans in Congress are usually reticent to defy the president because the president demands absolute loyalty. And the fact that 129 Republicans on the House floor were willing to go on record condemning the president's conduct essentially in the managing of this issue in northern Syria is significant. And Republicans in Congress, just like Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, want to see a plan, want the United States leading in the world, don't want the United States deferring to the Russians when it comes to Syria or any other conflict area in the world. So what you're starting to see is that Republicans, for the first time in a long time, are demonstrating a willingness to stand up to this president, to say when they think something's wrong, and that's a big deal these days.
And in fact, I think few people have been more passionate against the president's decision than someone who has been in his corner more passionately than almost anyone else, and that's Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham is not his friend on this decision. Let's listen.
He's not listening to his commanders. He's not listening to his advisors. He's making the biggest mistake of his presidency by assuming the Kurds are better off today than they were yesterday. That is just unbelievable. I can imagine if Obama said that, what Republicans would be saying now. So I'm going to say it with Trump. That is just unfair, dangerous, and quite frankly, it's dishonorable for us to abandon the Kurds. I would say that if Obama did it.
Dishonorable. And Matt Miller, then you have the president sending a letter to the Turkish president that apparently they just threw away and then continued with their invasion. It's as if, Matt, the U.S. is not viewed as the world's greatest superpower, but kind of a joke to be ignored.
Well, I think it's because, Erdogan feels free to throw that letter in the trash because he knows he got the green light from President Trump several days before that, and Trump's kind of after the fact attempt to kind of clean up his mess. Erdogan sees it for exactly what it is, which is the letter not worth the paper it was printed on. With respect to Lindsey Graham, it's interesting to see that Republicans, Graham in particular, will stand up to the president when there's something that they really care about. And in Lindsey Graham's case, the thing he's always cared about is U.S. involvement in the Middle East. And so when it comes to an issue like that, he's willing to call President Trump on it and criticize him.
But
it would be nice
calling
to see
him on it is one thing. Getting something done right is another thing. So where does this go, Matt?
Well, I think that's my point is I don't know that it will go anywhere. Look, you might see the Congress pass sanctions, but the point I was going to make is it would be nice to see Lindsey Graham show that same courage to stand up when the president tramples on the Constitution, when he tramples on the rights of Americans, when he refuses to comply with congressional subpoenas. Something Lindsey Graham has said in the past is impeachable. So I think the question is always with Republicans on the Hill is whether their sometimes brief words of criticism against the president will translate into actual action.
Congresswoman Edwards, like a lot of people, I woke up this morning and saw the news about your friend, Congressman Elijah Cummings, and I thought, wow, what would he think about this meeting yesterday at the White House? What would he have to say? A true statesman in a world where, frankly, people who are willing to reach across the aisle to make a Mark Meadows, someone that they can have a conversation with, are unfortunately fewer and more far between. Tell us about the man you knew, Elijah Cummings.
Well, it's so interesting because, Elijah was at his core, he was from Baltimore, he represented Baltimore, but he was beloved around our state. But really, for the nation, this is a huge loss of somebody who had a powerful voice, and he would say for the voiceless, and thinking about children yet unborn always. The congressman is going to be deeply missed. And, when you think about the environment that we're in now, his work on the Oversight Committee has been important in all of this process that we're in right now. And for our state and for the city of Baltimore, it's just a really devastating loss.
Yeah, the son of former sharecroppers, but somebody who never lost his connection to Baltimore, to the people there, who seemed to me was Baltimore, loved it so much. And Congressman Carbello, again, one of the folks whose loss is hitting people on both sides of the aisle hard.
Chris, think about it. Elijah Cummings led what is by its nature the most partisan committee in the Congress. A lot of contentious issues on that oversight committee, yet he was always a gentleman. He always carried himself with respect, with dignity. He was humble. He was the kind of guy who was always the last one out of the elevator when we would go to the floor to vote. What we need more of in the Congress just lost with the passing of Elijah Cummings. So hopefully his memory will inspire today's members of Congress to treat each other with that respect, with that dignity, with that decency that we all deserve, and quite frankly, that the American people deserve.
Matt, we're out of time, but I do want to say that President and Mrs. Obama released a statement, and I'm just going to pull a line out of it where he describes Cummings as steely yet compassionate, principled yet open to new perspectives. Chairman Cummings remains steadfast in his pursuit of truth, justice, and reconciliation. Your thoughts before we go?
You really can't say it any better than that. I think the Congress and the country lost a real legend today. He will be greatly missed, and if there's anything that can come from his legacy in Congress, it would be nice, as the congressman said, to see more members of Congress take their obligation to the Constitution and their obligation to public service more seriously and treat it like he did throughout his career.
As seriously as he did. Matt Miller, former members of Congress, Carlos Carbello and Donna Edwards, thanks to all of you. Much appreciated. And coming up, we've got some new
He will be missed. He was very, very passionate. Some even called him a bootleg preacher because he come from a family with great faith. Died at the age of 68. Like I said a while ago, all this rigmarole going on in the White House only exacerbated the problems pertaining to his health. It didn't help none. Whenever you're under this type of stress, this type of mental and emotional stress, it can and will have a bearing on your life, especially if you're already fighting for certain elements pertaining to the failure of your life. It will only exacerbate the problem. A matter of fact, a lot of your doctors and your psychologists and your psychiatrists will tell you that one of the leading factors here in America, other than gun violence, is stress. People trying to turn too many somersaults and cartwheels at the same time, kind of like your soccer mom. She's got to be at the football game at 4, she's got to be at the soccer game at 3. She's got to take care of the house chores, plus make sure that this is done and that's done, and still have dinner on the table by 7 o'clock when everybody finally meets in their little safe haven. People are putting entirely too much stress on themselves to the point that it drives them off into a state of bad health. Stress will literally kill you if you allow for it to. I think America has one of the most worked labor force in the whole planet. As far as people working some 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. unbelievable. Your body is not meant to go through such rigorous conditions as that. And if it don't catch up with you on the front end, I guarantee you it will catch up with you on the back end towards wear and tear on your muscles, your joints, and your emotions. It will have a profound effect on one's life. Once more, he will be missed. Good luck to all of us as these things continue to unfold here in the USA. Shalom.